The morning he left, I was folding laundry in the bedroom we'd shared for 22 years. I heard his footsteps pause at the doorway, felt his presence without looking up, and somewhere deep inside I already knew. He didn't say much. Just that he needed something different, something more, as if I had become background noise in his own life. I remember nodding slowly, my hand still gripping his wrinkled shirt, wondering when I had stopped being enough. The door closed quietly behind him, no anger, no shouting, just the soft click of a lock that felt final. For weeks afterward, I kept setting 2 plates at dinner, kept reaching for his coffee mug in the morning, kept turning toward empty space in bed expecting warmth. People told me I'd be fine, that time heals, that I was strong enough to survive this, but nobody mentioned how strange it feels to wake up one day and realize you've spent half your life becoming someone's wife, and now you don't know who you are without that title. I was 53 years old when my marriage ended, though in many ways I think it had been ending for years without me noticing. I had become the kind of woman who moved through her days on autopilot, completing tasks without really feeling them. My mornings always started the same way. Wake at 6, brew coffee in the same pot we'd received as a wedding gift, toast 2 slices of bread, even though I rarely felt hungry. The house we lived in sat at the end of a quiet street lined with oak trees that had grown tall over the decades we'd been there. I used to love watching those trees change with the seasons, but somewhere along the way I stopped looking up. My name is Margaret, though most people called me Maggie. I worked part-time at a small bookstore downtown, the kind with creaky wooden floors and the smell of old paper that clings to your clothes. It wasn't glamorous work, but I liked the quiet rhythm of it, the way customers would come in searching for something specific and leave with something unexpected. I had taken the job 15 years earlier, when our daughter went off to college, needing something to fill the empty hours. My husband worked long days as an insurance adjuster, coming home tired and distracted, and I learned to occupy myself without bothering him. I had small routines that defined my existence. Every Tuesday I would water the plants on the back porch, talking to them softly as if they were old friends. Thursday evenings I drove to the grocery store at exactly 5:30, always parking in the same spot near the cart return. I kept the house clean without thinking about it, my hands moving through familiar motions. Wiping counters, straightening pillows, picking up socks from the bathroom floor. Looking back, I realize I had made myself small and efficient, taking up as little space as possible in my own life. The morning he left, I had been planning what to make for dinner that night. I remember standing in the kitchen, mentally going through the contents of the refrigerator, wondering if chicken would be enough or if I should stop by the store. These were the thoughts occupying my mind when my entire world shifted. After he drove away, I stood in that kitchen for what felt like hours, the silence pressing against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and then stopped. I realized I had no idea what I wanted for dinner, what I wanted to do that evening, what I wanted at all. The house felt different immediately, like all the air had been sucked out of it. I moved from room to room touching things. The back of the couch where he used to sit, the coffee table cluttered with his magazines, the closet still half full of his clothes he said he'd come back for later. Each object felt like evidence of a life I thought I understood but clearly didn't. That first night, I slept on the couch because the bed felt too big, too empty, too honest about what I'd lost. Comment below where you're watching from and share if life has ever tested you like this. Don't forget to subscribe. The story is just beginning. I met him when I was 31, later than most of my friends had married. He was kind in those early days, attentive in a way that made me feel chosen. We dated for 2 years before he proposed at a restaurant overlooking the harbor, the ring hidden in a dessert I almost didn't order. I remember feeling relieved more than anything. Relieved that my life was finally clicking into place the way everyone said it should. My mother cried at the wedding, happy tears she said. Though looking back I wonder if she saw something I couldn't. The first decade of our marriage was good, or at least I thought it was. We bought the house with the oak trees out front, painted the walls colors we chose together, planted a garden that mostly died but we laughed about it. Our daughter was born 3 years in, and for a while everything revolved around her, sleepless nights, first words, scraped knees, school plays. I threw myself into motherhood with the same efficiency I brought to everything else, becoming the kind of mother who never missed a parent teacher conference, who baked cupcakes for every class party, who knew all the other mothers by name. But somewhere in those busy years, my husband and I stopped being partners and became roommates managing a household. Our conversations shrank to logistics: who would pick up groceries, when the mortgage was due, whether the car needed an oil change. We stopped asking each other about dreams or fears, or the small moments that made up our days. When our daughter left for college, the house went quiet in a way that felt permanent. We had spent so many years talking through her that we'd forgotten how to talk to each other. I tried to bridge that distance in small ways. I'd suggest going out to dinner, maybe catching a movie like we used to. He'd agree but spend the evening checking his phone, distracted by something I wasn't part of. I started going to bed earlier just to avoid the awkward hours of sitting in the same room, pretending to watch television together. Some nights I'd wake at 2 or 3 in the morning and find him still downstairs, the blue glow of his laptop illuminating his face. When I asked what he was working on, he'd say just work stuff, nothing interesting, and I'd nod and go back to bed feeling like an intruder in my own home. The signs were there if I'd wanted to see them. The way he started dressing better for work, buying new shirts without me noticing until they appeared in the laundry. The late meetings that ran past dinner time, then past bedtime, then sometimes overnight. The password he added to his phone that he'd never needed before. But I didn't want to see them, didn't want to ask questions that might have answers I couldn't unknow. I told myself we were just going through a phase, that all marriages had seasons, that the warmth would return if I just waited patiently enough. I tried to become more interesting, thinking maybe that was the problem. I started reading the news more carefully, so I'd have things to discuss. I bought a new dress, styled my hair differently, wore perfume even though we weren't going anywhere special. But he barely noticed, and when he did it felt performative, like he was saying what he thought he should say, rather than what he felt. I began to understand that I had become invisible to him, not through any single moment but through the slow accumulation of being overlooked. Looking back, I think I knew our marriage was ending long before he said the words. I knew it in the way my chest tightened when I heard his car in the driveway. I knew it in how I stopped sharing small joys with him because his disinterest hurt more than keeping them to myself. I knew it in the way I'd started imagining different versions of my life, versions where I lived alone in a small apartment and didn't have to navigate the silent disappointment that had settled over our home like dust. The day he told me he was leaving, I had just finished organizing the hall closet, something I did when I needed to feel in control of something, anything. I heard him come in through the front door, heard him set down his keys with that familiar metallic clink. He called my name, not Maggie but Margaret, and the formality of it made my stomach drop. I came out of the closet holding a box of old scarves I'd been meaning to donate, and he was standing in the living room looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite guilt, not quite relief, something in between. He sat down on the edge of the couch, and I remained standing because sitting felt like agreeing to whatever was coming. He said it plainly, no preamble, no softening of the blow. He said he'd been unhappy for a long time, that he'd met someone who made him feel alive again, that he couldn't keep pretending our marriage was something it wasn't. The words came at me like stones, each one hitting a different part of my chest. I remember focusing on his hands, watching them grip his knees, noticing he wasn't wearing his wedding ring and wondering when he'd taken it off, how I hadn't noticed its absence. I asked him who she was, and he said it didn't matter, that it wasn't about her, it was about us growing apart. But of course it mattered. It mattered that while I was folding his laundry, and making his coffee and sleeping beside him, thinking we were building a life together, he was building something else with someone else. I asked how long, and he hesitated before saying almost a year. A year, 360, 5 days of coming home to me while wanting to be somewhere else. 360, 5 days of letting me believe we were just going through a rough patch that would smooth itself out with patience. I didn't cry at first. I think I was too shocked, too busy trying to reorganize my understanding of reality. I asked him what he wanted me to do, where he expected me to go, and he said he wasn't asking me to leave. He would go, he'd already found an apartment, he'd come back for his things gradually. He said this like it was generous, like he was doing me a favor by not displacing me from the home we'd built together. I set the box of scarves down on the coffee table very carefully, focusing on that simple action because everything else felt too big to comprehend. After he left that day, I sat in the living room until the light changed from afternoon to evening to night. I didn't turn on any lamps, just let the darkness settle around me. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. When did I stop being enough? What could I have done differently? How did I miss an entire year of betrayal happening right in front of me? I thought about all the dinners I'd cooked that he barely touched, all the conversations I'd tried to start that went nowhere, all the times I'd reached for his hand and found it pulling away. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I couldn't imagine facing customers, making small talk, pretending everything was normal when my entire life had just collapsed. I spent that day going through photos, trying to pinpoint the exact moment we went wrong. There were pictures of us at the beach, at our daughter's graduation, at Christmas dinners with his family. We looked happy in those photos, or at least I looked happy. I couldn't tell anymore what was real and what I'd imagined. My daughter called that evening, and I almost didn't tell her. I didn't want to burden her, didn't want her to feel like she had to choose sides or come rushing home to take care of me. But she heard something in my voice and kept asking until I finally said, "Your father's moved out." And then the tears came, the kind that feel like they're being pulled from somewhere deep in your chest. She said she'd come visit that weekend, asked if I was okay, and I said yes because mothers always say yes even when the answer is no. The hardest part wasn't his absence. It was the presence of all the reminders that he'd been there. His reading glasses still on the nightstand. His favorite cereal still in the pantry. The dent in his side of the couch that hadn't sprung back yet. I found myself avoiding certain rooms, certain corners where his ghost felt too real. At night I'd wake up reaching for him before remembering he was gone, and each time that realization landed fresh, like learning it for the first time. 3 weeks after he left, I was standing in the kitchen staring at the coffee maker when I realized I'd been making 2 cups every morning out of habit, pouring one down the sink because I couldn't break the routine. That morning I made just 1 cup, and it felt like the smallest, strangest victory. I held that single mug in both hands, felt its warmth seep into my palms, and thought this is where I start. Here, with 1 cup instead of 2, I started making other small changes, things so tiny they seemed meaningless but felt monumental. I moved his magazines from the coffee table to a box in the garage. I rearranged the living room furniture so the couch faced a different direction. I bought flowers for myself at the grocery store. Bright yellow daisies that I put in a vase on the kitchen table, where I could see them every morning. These weren't grand gestures of moving on, just small declarations that this was my space now, my life to arrange however I wanted. Going back to work helped more than I expected. The bookstore had always been my refuge, and now it became my anchor. I started staying later, volunteering to help with inventory, reorganizing shelves that didn't really need reorganizing. The owner, Mrs. Chen, never asked questions but seemed to understand I needed somewhere to be that wasn't the too quiet house. She started leaving me little tasks, special projects that required my attention and gave my days structure beyond just showing up. One afternoon a woman came in looking for books about starting over after divorce. She was younger than me, maybe early 40s, with that raw look of someone recently wounded. I helped her find what she needed, and as she was leaving she turned back and said, "Does it get easier?" And I surprised myself by saying yes. I didn't know if that was true yet, but saying it out loud felt like making a promise to myself that I intended to keep. I started doings I'd stopped doing years ago, small interests I'd let fade, because they didn't fit into the life I'd been living. I joined a book club at the library, showing up every other Thursday evening to discuss novels with strangers who knew nothing about my marriage or my failure to keep it together. I started taking walks in the mornings before work, following the same route through the neighborhood, but seeing it differently now, noticing details I'd missed before. The way light filtered through the oak trees, the sound of wind chimes from a house 3 doors down, the elderly man who walked his dog at exactly 7:15 every day and eventually started nodding hello. My daughter came to visit more often than she needed to, and I could tell she was worried about me. She'd find reasons to check the refrigerator, make sure I was eating, ask if I was sleeping okay. I appreciated her concern, but also wanted to prove I was managing, that I wasn't falling apart in ways that required her caretaking. We started having real conversations during those visits, adult conversations where she told me about her life, and I told her about mine, not as mother and daughter playing roles but as two women figuring out how to navigate the world. One Saturday afternoon I was cleaning out the hall closet again, finally finishing the task I'd started the day he left, when I came across a box of my old things from before we married. There were journals I'd kept in my 20s, photos from trips I'd taken with college friends, a sketchbook I'd filled with charcoal drawings back when I used to draw. I sat on the floor surrounded by these artifacts of who I'd been before I became someone's wife, and I felt this strange mixture of grief and recognition. That girl felt both familiar and foreign, and I wondered what she would think of the woman I'd become. I pulled out the sketchbook and flipped through pages of drawings I barely remembered making. Still lifes of fruit and flowers, portraits of people from my art class, abstract patterns that seemed to reflect whatever mood I'd been in. My hand had been confident back then, the lines bold and unapologetic. I found an old set of charcoal pencils in the bottom of the box, tested one on the edge of a page, and watched the dark line appear. Before I could talk myself out of it, I drove to the art supply store and bought fresh paper, new pencils, an eraser that smelled like childhood. That evening I sat at the kitchen table and tried to draw the vase of daisies. My hand felt clumsy, unpracticed, and the first few attempts looked like a child's scribbles. But I kept going, focusing on the curve of a petal, the way light caught the glass vase, the subtle shadows underneath. I drew for 2 hours without thinking about anything else, and when I finally stopped, my hand cramping slightly, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Present, focused, alive in my own skin. 4 months after he left, he called asking if we could meet to discuss the divorce details. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, where neither of us held the upper hand. I arrived early and chose a table by the window, ordered a latte I didn't really want just to have something to hold. When he walked in, I was struck by how ordinary he looked, how much smaller than I remembered. He'd lost weight, looked tired around the eyes, and there was a hesitance in his movements that was new. We made awkward small talk while waiting for his coffee. Weather, work, nothing that mattered. Then he pulled out papers from his briefcase, legal documents that would divide up the pieces of our life together, and we went through them item by item. The house would be mine, he said, since his name was the only one on the new apartment lease. He'd take half the savings, I'd keep my retirement account, we'd split the furniture he didn't already have. He spoke in this careful, measured way, like he was trying very hard to be fair, and I just nodded at the appropriate moments. Halfway through he stopped and looked at me directly for the first time. He said I looked different, and I realized he meant it as an observation, not a compliment. I do feel different, I told him. There was a silence then, and he asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of him asking that now. I told him I was fine, better than fine actually, and I could see something flicker across his face. Surprise maybe, or disappointment that I wasn't falling apart in ways that might make him feel needed. He asked about the bookstore, how work was going, and I told him about a project Mrs. Chen had given me, redesigning the front window displays to draw in more customers. I'd been using my drawing skills to create hand-lettered signs, arranging books in unexpected combinations, adding small touches that made the displays feel alive. The project had been so successful that Mrs. Chen was talking about making it a permanent part of my job, with a raise to match. I wasn't sure why I told him this. Maybe to prove I was building something without him. Maybe just because it was the most interesting thing happening in my life. He nodded but seemed distracted, and then he said something I wasn't expecting. He said she left, the woman he'd been with. Said it hadn't worked out the way he thought it would, that things felt different once the excitement wore off. He wasn't asking to come back, wasn't fishing for reconciliation. But I could hear something underneath his words, regret maybe, or just the realization that the grass wasn't actually greener, just different grass with its own problems. I looked at him across the table, this man I'd spent 22 years trying to please, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity really. Just a quiet neutrality, like looking at a stranger whose story I'd heard, but didn't need to be part of. I told him I was sorry it didn't work out, and I meant it in the most distant, polite way possible. Then I signed the papers where he indicated, gathered my things, and stood to leave. He called my name as I was walking away, and when I turned back, he looked like he wanted to say something important, something that might change things. But I didn't wait to hear it. I walked out of that coffee shop into bright afternoon sunlight, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because of anything he'd said or done, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for him to validate my existence. The divorce was finalized on a Sunday, the same day I usually watered my plants. I came home from the courthouse with papers that said I was single again, legally untethered from the life I'd built with him. I should have felt sad or lost, but instead I felt like I'd been given permission to start over completely. That evening I stood on the back porch watering the plants, talking to them, like always, and I realized I was smiling. I threw myself into the window display project at the bookstore with new energy. Mrs. Chen gave me creative freedom, and I used it to transform the front of the store into something that felt alive and inviting. I drew elaborate lettering for book titles, arranged displays by color and mood rather than genre, added small touches like vintage teacups holding bookmarks or string lights woven between stacks. Customers started coming in just to see what I'd done with the windows, and sales increased enough that Mrs. Chen made my raise permanent. I started attending art classes at the community center on Wednesday evenings, sitting in a bright room with other adults rediscovering creativity. We drew still lifes and portraits, experimented with watercolors and pastels, shared the quiet satisfaction of making something with our hands. I wasn't the best in the class, but I didn't need to be. I just needed to feel that connection to who I'd been before I became only someone's wife. My daughter noticed the changes when she visited. She said I seemed happier, lighter somehow, and I realized she was right. The weight I'd been carrying, the constant low-level anxiety of not being enough, had lifted without me noticing its absence. We cooked dinner together in the kitchen, laughing over mistakes, not trying to make anything perfect. She told me she was proud of me, and I felt that pride settle into my chest like something warm and solid. I started saying yes to things I would have automatically declined before. Coffee with a coworker I barely knew who became a real friend. A weekend trip to the coast with my book club to visit an author's hometown. A painting class that met early Saturday mornings when I would have normally been cleaning the house. Each yes felt like a small rebellion against the life I'd been living, the one where I made myself small and convenient and unobtrusive. The house stopped feeling haunted by his absence. I rearranged more furniture, painted an accent wall in the living room a deep teal color I'd always loved, but he'd said was too bold. I hung my drawings on the walls, imperfect but mine. Proof that I was creating something rather than just maintaining what already existed. The space became mine in a way it never had been when we were together. Some mornings I'd wake up and forget for a moment that I was alone, but instead of that realization bringing sadness, it brought relief. I could stretch out in bed without worrying about waking anyone. I could make coffee exactly how I liked it without compromise. I could spend Sunday mornings reading in silence or dancing to music too loud or doing absolutely nothing at all. The freedom was subtle but profound, like taking off shoes that had been too tight for so long I'd forgotten what comfort felt like. I'm 54 now, just a year older than when he left but feeling like I've lived several lifetimes in that span. People sometimes ask if I'm bitter about the years I gave to that marriage, and I tell them honestly that I'm not. Those years taught me things I needed to know, even if the lessons came with pain. They taught me that you can lose yourself gradually, one small compromise at a time, until you wake up one day and don't recognize the person you've become. They taught me that endings aren't always tragedies. Sometimes they're necessary clearings that make room for new growth. I don't regret my marriage, but I also don't miss it. What I miss is time, the years I spent waiting for someone else to give me permission to be fully myself. But I have time now, time I'm spending exactly how I choose. I'm drawing again, creating beauty for its own sake rather than for anyone's approval. I'm building friendships that feed my soul rather than drain it. I'm learning that being alone doesn't mean being lonely, that solitude can be a gift rather than a punishment. Sometimes I see him around town, at the grocery store, walking down the sidewalk, sitting in his car at a red light. We nod politely like acquaintances who once knew each other better, and that's all it is now. He's become part of my history, an important chapter in the story, but not the whole story, not even close. I've written new chapters since he left, Better chapters filled with discovery and courage and quiet joy. The bookstore window I designed won a business award from the local Chamber of Commerce. Mrs. Chen insisted I attend the ceremony, and standing there accepting applause for something I'd created, I felt this overwhelming sense of being exactly where I was supposed to be, not as somebody's wife or mother or helper, but as myself, Maggie, the woman who rebuilt her life one small choice at a time. On my 54th birthday, my daughter came to visit and found me in the kitchen making 1 cup of coffee, no longer even thinking about it, just automatically doing what felt natural. She hugged me and said, "I love who you're becoming," and I realized with sudden clarity that I loved who I was becoming too. Not perfect, not finished, but authentically mine in a way I'd never been before. I still water my plants every Tuesday, still walk the same neighborhood route every morning, still work at the bookstore among the smell of old paper and possibility. But now these routines feel like choices rather than obligations, like threads I'm weaving into a life I'm consciously creating. The oak trees outside my window are budding again with spring growth, reaching toward light the way all living things do when given the chance. If I could go back and tell that woman folding laundry in the bedroom what I know now, I'd tell her that the door closing behind him wasn't an ending. It was an opening, a crack letting light to rooms that had been dim too long. I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, that survival isn't just about enduring but about becoming something new from the broken pieces. I'd tell her that the best version of her life isn't the one she's desperately trying to hold together, but the one waiting on the other side of letting go. I pour my single cup of coffee now and sit at the kitchen table, watching morning light filter through the window, and I feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything figured out, but the kind that comes from knowing I'm enough exactly as I am, that I don't need anyone else to complete me or validate my existence. I am whole on my own, and that realization tastes sweeter than any love I settled for before.